Blood on white snow tells no lies. When the most powerful Alpha King in the realm tossed his crippled son into the unforgiving winter, the elite packs bolted their doors. They chose politics over a child's life, but a broken Omega chose to carry him. This is their frozen survival. The winter of 1432 was recorded in the archives as the Frost of Dead Men. It was a season so brutal that the towering pine trees of the northern territories splintered in the dead of night, their sap frozen solid. But the cold outside the great keep of Wolfsgate was nothing compared to the ice in King Alaric's heart. King Alaric was the supreme ruler of the allied packs, a man whose roar could shake the dust from the castle rafters. Yet on the eve of the winter solstice, he stood on the obsidian balcony overlooking the courtyard and did the unthinkable. He condemned his own flesh and blood. Little Liam was only 5 years old. 2 weeks prior, a heavy iron portcullis had accidentally dropped, crushing the boy's right leg. The healers whispered that the child would never walk properly again, let alone shift into a formidable wolf. In the ruthless medieval werewolf society, a crippled royal was not just a tragedy. He was considered a curse from the moon goddess herself. The king's new wife, Queen Rosalind, a cunning woman who despised the boy because he was the son of Alaric's late beloved first mate, seized the opportunity. She convinced the Alpha King that keeping the deformed pup would invite famine and war. By the ancient laws of the lycanthrope, Alaric's voice boomed, echoing off the stone walls. A wolf who cannot run with the pack cannot eat with the pack. The boy is stripped of his royal name. Let the winter decide his fate. Guards dragged the weeping child into the center of the snow-filled courtyard and left him there. His leg wrapped in blood-soaked linen dragged uselessly behind him. The courtyard was lined with visiting nobles and alphas from neighboring territories. Alpha Gideon of the Redridge pack scoffed, pulling his heavy fur cloak tighter around his broad shoulders. Alpha Roland of the Frostpeak clan simply looked away. When the king retired to his chambers, the heavy oak doors of the keep slammed shut. One by one, the visiting alphas and their entourages departed, deliberately walking wide of the shivering child. Little Liam held out a trembling, frostbitten hand, begging the noble lords for scraps, for warmth, for pity. Every single pack refused him. To help the boy was to defy the Alpha King, and no one was willing to risk their territory for a broken pup. Watching from the shadows of the scullery was Clara Caldwell. Clara was an Omega, the lowest-ranking member of the royal pack. Her days consisted of scrubbing the stone floors of the mead hall until her knuckles bled and enduring the cruel kicks of the higher-ranking guards. She was 20 years old, frail, and possessed no wolf capable of shifting. She was practically human in their eyes, a dirt-stained servant invisible to the nobility. But as Clara watched the great alphas ride away, leaving a 5-year-old child to freeze to death, something ancient and fierce snapped inside her chest. She waited until the courtyard was plunged into the pitch black of a moonless night. The temperature plummeted to a deadly degree. Sneaking past the drunken sentries, Clara crawled through the snowbanks, the biting frost seeping through her threadbare wool dress. She found Liam curled into a tight, agonizing ball, his lips blue, his breathing shallow and ragged. "Shh, little one," Clara whispered, her teeth chattering as she scooped his fragile body into her arms. He was unnaturally light. "I've got you. I won't let the winter have you." Liam opened his eyes, striking luminescent amber eyes that belonged only to the royal bloodline, and buried his face into Clara's neck. In his tiny freezing fist, he clutched a heavy silver ring set with a glowing moonstone. It was the king's ancestral signet, which Liam had desperately grabbed from his father's hand before being cast out. Clara knew that if they were caught, she would be flayed alive. Stripping off her only woolen shawl, She wrapped it tightly around the boy, tying him to her chest. With nothing but a stolen hunting knife, a flint, and a small sack of stale bread, the Omega turned her back on the only home she had ever known and stepped out into the howling abyss of the whispering pines. By dawn, Clara was a walking ghost. The snow was waist-deep, forcing her to drag her legs through the drifts like heavy lead weights. The wind screamed through the bare branches, whipping ice crystals against her exposed face until her cheeks cracked and bled. Every step was an agony of screaming muscles and burning lungs, but the faint, rhythmic heartbeat of the child strapped to her chest kept her moving. She needed shelter, and more importantly, she needed a healer for Liam's leg. The wound had begun to smell of sickness, a sweet, rotting scent that attracted scavengers. Clara knew that just across the frozen Blackwater River lay the territory of the River Run pack ruled by the wealthy Alpha Roland. Surely away from the king's watchful eyes, they would show mercy to a dying child. It took Clara 2 grueling days to reach the imposing wooden gates of the River Run settlement. She was starving, her boots soaked through, and her fingers blackening with the early stages of frostbite. She collapsed at the gates, pounding her numb fists against the timber. "Please!" she screamed, her voice a hoarse rasp. "Sanctuary, I have a wounded child." The viewing hatch slid open, revealing the sneering face of Guard Captain Arthur. He looked down at the pathetic, shivering Omega, his eyes narrowing as he recognized the boy strapped to her. Even covered in dirt and frost, the royal amber eyes of the pup were unmistakable. "You bring the king's exiled trash to our doorstep." Arthur spat the heavy scent of ale on his breath, wafting down. "Alpha Roland gave strict orders. We harbor no cursed outcasts. Take the cripple and die in the woods, Omega, before I put an arrow in both of your throats." "He is just a boy," Clara begged, dropping to her knees in the snow. "He isn't cursed. Please, just a blanket, a fire. Let him sit by your hearth for 1 hour. "Begone!" Arthur shouted, and the heavy thud of a crossbow being cocked echoed from the watchtower. Tears of pure, unadulterated rage froze on Clara's cheeks. She looked up at the guard, her usually submissive Omega nature vanishing. "The moon goddess watches." She snarled, a strange, guttural resonance vibrating in her throat that made Arthur inexplicably step back from the hatch. "She watches, and she will remember your closed doors." Clara turned away, forcing her exhausted legs to carry them back into the wilderness. The rejection stung worse than the frost. The pack, supposedly bound by honor and brotherhood, were entirely hollow. As a blizzard descended, blanketing the forest in a blinding white fury, Clara found a shallow limestone cave hidden behind a frozen waterfall. It offered meager protection from the wind, but the temperature was still lethal. Liam was no longer shivering, a terrifying sign of severe hypothermia. His skin was grey, and the fever from his mangled leg was burning him up from the inside. Clara frantically gathered dry moss and dead twigs, striking her flint with numb, uncooperative hands. She struck it once, twice, a dozen times. No spark. Panic clawed at her throat. In her desperation, the knife slipped, slicing a deep gash across her palm. "No, no, no," she sobbed, dropping the flint. Blood poured freely from her hand, a stark crimson against the grey stone. She crawled over to Liam to check his breathing. As she reached out to touch his feverish forehead, a few drops of her blood fell directly onto the rotting, infected wound on his crushed leg. What happened next defied every law of nature. Where Clara's blood touched the boy's skin, a faint, searing, golden light ignited. The dark, necrotic veins around Liam's injury began to recede, turning a healthy pink. The sickening smell of rot vanished, replaced by the scent of pine and wild rain. Liam drew in a sharp, deep breath, his chest rising steadily as his fever broke. Clara fell backward, clutching her bleeding hand to her chest, her eyes wide with shock. Omegas did not have healing blood. In fact, no wolf did unless they were born of the ancient extinct line of the Sunwalkers, the legendary first wolves who possessed magic in their veins. Before Clara could process the impossible reality of her own bloodline, a terrifying sound echoed through the cavern. It was the deep, resonant howl of a tracker wolf. Back at Wolf's Gate, Queen Rosalind had discovered the theft of the royal signet ring. Realizing the political danger of the crippled pup surviving and possessing the king's seal, the only item that could legitimize a claim to the throne, she had dispatched the king's most ruthless assassin, Commander Fenwick, and his elite hunting hounds. They weren't just meant to retrieve the ring. They were ordered to bring back the pup's head. Clara heard the crunch of heavy boots in the snow outside the cave. She looked at the sleeping boy, then down at her glowing, blood-stained hand. The Omega, who had scrubbed floors her entire life, picked up her hunting knife, standing between the mouth of the cave and the Alpha King's pup. She had run as far as she could. Now she would have to fight. The entrance of the limestone cave darkened as a massive silhouette blocked out the howling blizzard. Commander Fenwick stepped into the shallow cavern, the heavy iron chain in his hand attached to 3 snarling, red-eyed tracker hounds. Fenwick was a brute of a man, scarred from 100 border skirmishes, wrapped in heavy bear furs that made him look twice his size. "Well, well," Fenwick rumbled his voice, a gravelly sneer that echoed off the damp stone. "I expected to find the crippled whelp dead in a snowbank. I didn't expect to find a scrub wench playing nursemaid. You've led us on a merry chase, Omega." Clara did not move. She stood over Liam's unconscious body, her small hunting knife gripped so tightly her knuckles were white. Her left hand, still slick with her own blood, throbbed with a strange, pulsating heat. "Leave us!" Clara demanded, her voice surprisingly steady. "He is no threat to the king. Let us disappear." Fenwick threw his head back and laughed, a cruel, barking sound. "The queen wants the ring wench, and the Alpha King wants the boy's head in a sack to ensure the Beaufort lineage remains uncontested. Be a good little Omega, drop the knife, and I'll make your death quick." He unclipped the heavy iron clasp holding the hounds. "Tear her apart." The 3 massive wolves lunged forward, their jaws snapping eyes wide with the promise of blood. Clara braced herself, raising the knife. But as the hounds closed the distance, the heavy scent of Clara's freshly spilled blood hit their noses. It was not the scent of fear. It was not the scent of prey. It was the scent of ozone, crushed pine, and ancient, unyielding authority. It was the scent of the Sunwalkers, the primordial ancestors of all lycanthropes, the mythic beings who first communed with the moon goddess. For centuries, the royal historians of the House of Beaufort had claimed the bloodline was extinct, wiped out during the Great Purge of 1099. But the blood running through Clara Caldwell's veins was an unbroken ancient thread. The lead hound skidded to a halt so violently it crashed into the cave wall. The other 2 dropped to their bellies, instantly tucking their tails between their legs and pressing their snouts into the dirt. They whined a high-pitched, pathetic sound of absolute submission. "What is this?" Fenwick roared, kicking the nearest hound. "Get up, you useless curs! Kill her!" The hounds refused to move, trembling as Clara took a step forward. The strange golden luminescence that had healed Liam's leg now faintly radiated from Clara's skin. The deep gash on her palm had already knit itself back together, leaving only a shimmering silver scar. "I said," Clara whispered, the resonance in her voice doubling, vibrating with an unnatural commanding frequency. "Leave us!" Enraged, Fenwick drew a serrated broadsword from his hip. "If the dogs won't do it, I'll carve you up myself." He lunged, bringing the heavy blade down in a brutal arc aimed at Clara's neck. Clara moved with a speed that defied human or werewolf biology. Her Omega limitations shattered as the dormant Sunwalker magic flooded her system. She sidestepped the heavy blow, the broad sword sparking violently against the stone wall. Before Fenwick could recover his balance, Clara stepped inside his guard. She didn't use the knife. Instead, she pressed her open palm directly against the center of Fenwick's chest. A shockwave of pure kinetic energy erupted from her hand. The impact sounded like a thunderclap inside the small cave. Fenwick was lifted entirely off his feet, thrown backward with bone-crushing force. He slammed into the stalagmites at the cave's entrance, his spine snapping on impact. He slumped to the frozen ground, dead before he even realized he had been defeated. Clara stood panting, the golden light slowly fading from her skin until the cave returned to the gloom of winter. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed to the cold stone, the adrenaline leaving her system in a sudden rush. Clara, she turned her head. Little Liam was sitting up. The necrotic black flesh of his crushed leg was completely gone. In its place was smooth, unblemished skin. He tentatively moved his toes, then bent his knee. The bone had perfectly reset. The royal pup looked at his healed leg, then up at the exhausted woman who had just defied the Alpha King's greatest assassin. He crawled over to her, his amber eyes wide with innocent reverence, and wrapped his small arms around her neck. "You're glowing," he whispered. "We have to go," Clara breathed, pulling herself up. "If Fenwick doesn't return, they will send an army." With Fenwick's heavy cloak for warmth and his supply pack for food, Clara and Liam fled into the deepest, uncharted regions of the southern wastes. They crossed the treacherous Blackwater River on ice floes and vanished into the shadowed valleys of the Forgotten Territories, far beyond the reach of King Alaric and Queen Rosalind. 15 years passed. In the secluded ancient ruins of the Valerian archives, a forgotten fortress carved into the side of a great southern mountain, the crippled pup grew into a legend. Liam was no longer a discarded, fragile boy. At 20 years old, he had grown into a colossus. He stood 6 feet and 5 inches tall, with shoulders broad enough to block a doorway, and muscles forged from years of surviving in the harshest wilderness known to their kind. When he shifted, his wolf was a terrifying, magnificent beast of pure, shimmering gold, a physical manifestation of the Sunwalker magic that had healed his leg and fused with his royal alpha blood. He was unmatched in combat, a lethal hunter, and possessed an aura of dominance that made wild mountain predators bow their heads in his presence. But the most extraordinary phenomenon of their exile was Clara. The activation of her Sunwalker magic had halted her aging entirely. At 35, she looked exactly as she had at 20, ethereal, unblemished, with a quiet, powerful grace that anchored Liam's tempestuous nature. She was the strategist, the historian who translated the ancient texts of the Valerian library, and the sole reason Liam had retained his humanity. Their dynamic had shifted, subtly, inevitably. The maternal bond of a savior and a child had evolved into something entirely different. In the lore of the lycanthropes, the moon goddess decrees a single fated mate for every wolf, a soul whose frequency perfectly matches their own. It happened on the eve of Liam's 20th birthday. A vicious mountain blizzard, eerily similar to the one they had escaped all those years ago, raged outside their fortress. Liam had returned from a hunt, his bare chest slick with snow and the blood of a wild boar. Clara was by the hearth, reading an ancient tome. As Liam approached the fire, the air in the great stone room suddenly thickened. A rich, intoxicating scent of jasmine and rain flooded Liam's senses, the undeniable, overpowering scent of a true mate. He froze, his golden amber eyes locking onto Clara. Clara looked up, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. The ancient magic in her veins hummed in frantic, joyful recognition. She dropped the book. "Liam," she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. He crossed the room in 2 massive strides, dropping to his knees before her. The fearsome Alpha, who bowed to no god and no king, pressed his forehead against Claura's knees. He took her hand, the one bearing the silver scar from the day she saved him, and pressed his lips to it. I have known since I was old enough to understand what a soul is. Liam's voice was a deep, rough rumble that sent shivers down Claura's spine. You are not just my savior, Clara. You are my mate, my Luna, my equal in all things. Clara cupped his strong, rugged face, her thumbs brushing over his cheekbones. The age difference meant nothing. Her immortal blood and the goddess's decree had bridged the gap of time. I was an Omega who scrubbed floors. She murmured, a tear slipping down her cheek. You are the true Alpha King. I am nothing without you, Liam vowed fiercely, his amber eyes burning with intense possessive devotion. He stood pulling her up with him until she was flush against his chest, and kissed her a kiss that sealed a bond so powerful it sent a ripple of pure energy through the mountain itself. The Pax refused me. You carried me through the snow. Now, it is time I carry you to the throne. He pulled the heavy silver signet ring with the glowing moonstone from the leather cord around his neck. The time for hiding was over. The true king was returning. The northern territories were in a state of catastrophic decay. King Alaric's reign had turned paranoid and tyrannical. Queen Rosalind's extravagant demands had bled the Pax dry, and a bitter, relentless winter had caused famine to sweep across the land. The very Alphas who had turned their backs on a dying child, Alpha Gideon of Redridge and Alpha Roland of River Run, now sat in the great keep of Wolfsgate, their faces gaunt, bickering over dwindling grain supplies. King Alaric sat on the obsidian throne, looking frail and hollowed out by age and cruelty. Queen Rosalind stood beside him, draped in stolen jewels, her face a mask of bitter contempt for the complaining lords. We cannot tax the farmers any further. My king, Alpha Roland, argued, slamming his fist on the heavy oak table. The people are starving. If we do not open the royal reserves, there will be a rebellion. Let them rebel, Rosalind sneered. The royal guard will crush any dissent. You are Alphas. Act like it, instead of whining like beaten pups. Suddenly the massive iron-bound doors of the great keep groaned. The heavy wooden beam, locking them from the inside, began to splinter. Crack. The lords fell silent, turning toward the doors. The royal guards drew their weapons. Crack. The beam shattered into kindling, and the great doors blew open with explosive force. A howling winter wind tore through the mead hall, extinguishing the torches and plunging the room into shadows. Through the swirling snow, 2 figures stepped into the hall. One was a woman draped in a cloak of pure white fur, the hood pulled low, obscuring her face. The other was a towering giant of a man wrapped in black leather and steel, radiating an aura of dominance, so crushing that several of the lesser nobles were instantly forced to their knees. Who dares breach the king's hall? Alaric roared, standing from his throne, his voice lacking its former booming glory. The giant stepped forward. He reached up and pulled back his hood, revealing a mane of dark, untamed hair, and a pair of piercing, luminescent amber eyes. The eyes of the royal bloodline. He held up his massive, calloused hand. On his index finger rested the ancestral moonstone signet ring. I am Leonardo of the House of Beaufort, his voice thundered, shaking the very rafters of the keep. The pup you threw to the wolves. I have returned to claim what is mine. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. Alpha Gideon's face drained of color. Captain Arthur of the River Run Guard, standing near the back, dropped his halberd in sheer terror. Impossible, Rosalind hissed, gripping the armrest of the throne. He died in the frost. That is an impostor. The only impostor in this hall is the witch whispering poison in my father's ear. Liam growled, stepping further into the light. He didn't have a limp. His gait was predatory lethal and flawless. He locked eyes with Alaric. By the ancient laws of the lycanthrope, I invoke the right of challenge. Blood for blood, throne for throne. King Alaric's pride flared, overriding his fragile age. He stripped off his heavy cloak. You think you can defeat me, boy? I am the Alpha King. Alaric didn't bother with weapons. He shifted instantly, his bones cracking and reforming into a massive, grizzled grey wolf. He lunged at Liam, his jaws snapping for the younger man's throat. Liam did not flinch. He didn't even fully shift. As the great grey wolf flew through the air, Liam simply caught Alaric by the throat with one hand. The sheer physical strength required to stop a leaping, fully shifted Alpha in mid-air was unfathomable. Liam's eyes burned with a blinding golden fire. He slammed Alaric into the stone floor with a force that shattered the flagstones. The grey wolf whimpered, the fight completely knocked out of him in a single humiliating second. Liam placed his heavy boot on Alaric's chest, asserting absolute, undeniable dominance. The king's wolf submitted, exposing its neck. The battle was over before it began. Panic erupted. Seeing her husband defeated, Queen Rosalind shrieked in desperation. She snatched a poisoned crossbow from a nearby paralyzed guard, aiming it directly at Liam's unprotected back. "Die, you crippled freak!" she screamed, pulling the trigger. The steel bolt flew true, but it never hit its mark. The woman in the white cloak moved with a blur of impossible speed. Clara stepped directly between the bolt and Liam. She didn't try to dodge it. She simply caught the lethal steel bolt in her bare hand. The poisoned tip sliced deep into her palm. Clara, Liam roared, abandoning Alaric and rushing to her side. Rosalind laughed maniacally. "It is tipped with nightbane. She will be dead in seconds." Clara slowly lowered her hood, revealing her ageless, striking face. She looked at her bleeding hand. The blood dripping onto the stone floor wasn't red. It was glowing liquid gold. In front of the entire assembly of noble alphas, the deep cut on her hand hissed and instantly healed, purging the dark poison as black smoke. The golden aura erupted from Clara's body, illuminating the dark mead hall with a blinding divine light. The scent of ancient magic and raw power brought every single wolf in the room, including the defeated King Alaric, to their hands and knees. A Sunwalker. Alpha, Roland whispered, his voice trembling as tears streamed down his face. He pressed his forehead to the stone. "The goddess has returned to us." Clara tossed the broken crossbow bolt at Rosalind's feet. The queen collapsed, sobbing in sheer terror, as Liam's guards, who had instantly switched allegiances to the victor, surrounded her to drag her to the dungeons. Liam stood tall, wrapping a protective, possessive arm around Clara's waist, pulling her flush against him. He looked out at the sea of bowing alphas, the men who had locked their doors to a dying 5-year-old child. 15 years ago, Liam's voice rang out cold and merciless. "Every single pack refused me. You chose politics over honor. You chose cowardice over life. It was this woman, an Omega, a servant you deemed beneath your notice, who dragged me through the snow. She bled for me. She healed me. She is a descendant of the first wolves, and she is my destined mate." Liam turned to Clara, his fierce amber eyes softening with profound, unending love. He knelt before her, retrieving a crown of woven silver and moonstones from his pouch, a crown he had forged himself in the southern mountains. "Alpha Roland," Liam commanded, without looking away from Clara. "Yes, my king," Roland choked out from the floor. "Open the royal reserves, feed the people, and prepare the keep for a coronation." Liam placed the silver crown upon Clara's head, rising to kiss her deeply in front of the entire realm. For you do not just bow to a new king today. You bow to the Sunwalker Queen, and as the golden light of the new Luna bathed the cold stone walls of Wolf's Gate, the frost of dead men finally broke, giving way to the first true dawn the kingdom had seen in 15 years. Did the twists of the Sunwalker Queen and the crippled Alpha's triumphant return keep you on the edge of your seat? If you loved this tale of betrayal, undeniable fate and ultimate revenge, hit that like button and share it with your fellow pack members. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another epic werewolf romance drama. Drop a comment below. What would you have done in Clara's shoes? See you next time.